Yep, we're talking kaiju. This may seem a bit out of nowhere, but trust me, it'll make more sense by the end of it. Welcome back to Animation Station. As you can see, we are in black and white today. And you're probably wondering, why are we in black and white? Didn't the last time you did a black and white review not work very well? Yes, fair point, but I want to try it again because I just feel like doing this in black and white makes a lot more sense because this is in fact a black and white movie. Not in like its themes or anything, I mean like it's literally in black and white, there's no color. So, trying to keep tradition, I'm trying to do this to stay respectful and faithful to what I'm reviewing. It's a stylistic choice and nothing more. Don't worry, we'll be back to color reviews soon enough. But for these first two in this new marathon that I call Atomic Kings, we have to go black and white. We gotta go old school. So, with all that said, let's talk about Godzilla, 1954, the original movie created by Toho to warn people against the use of atomic bombs in war. It just so happened to also spawn its own franchise that ends up being disconnected from it entirely in terms of its tone, so. This is quite the fascinating anomaly we have here, but it does help that this fascinating anomaly is a really good film. Like, it is a really good movie, it is an enjoyable movie, and it is more my personal speed, as I will explain in this review. But, just saying right up front, this is a really good movie. That being said, however, it still has problems. Problems that we need to address and discuss. So, without further ado, I have a pretty lengthy written review for this one, and it's not in the same format as most of my other reviews, so I hope you guys enjoy the little bit of switch up, and if you want me to do more in this format rather than the other format, please let me know. So without further ado or delays, here is my written review for Godzilla 1954. Hope you guys enjoy. This may come as a shock to most people, but I'm not a huge fan of these kaiju movies. I do like them well enough, and they can be pretty fun when the monsters are just having an on-screen slugfest. But they can also be really repetitive, ridiculously cheesy to the point of laughable, and especially in the Legendary Pictures Monsterverse films, which we'll talk about when we get there, constantly shoehorn in pointless human characters that add nothing to the story and add nothing to the movie itself but names to posters for marquee value. I will elaborate further into that huge problem when we get to those films, with the exception of Kong Skull Island. That's the one time they have human characters in there and they're actually good. So, we'll talk about it when we get there. That being said, though, there's still plenty of things to like in the Godzilla slash Kaiju films by Toho, and I can definitely appreciate this original movie as it's a straightforward Japanese horror film first and foremost, which is more my speed over ridiculous, cheesy slugfest. Like, I have nothing against cheese, I have nothing against goofy action. I mean, hell, I literally just reviewed the Roadhouse remake, but there's a limit to what I can take, and this franchise is one of them. You guys have already seen that infamous clip about T-Pose Godzilla sliding on his tail to kick somebody. Yeah, that's not just dated, that's just bad. So, yeah, we'll get there when we get there. Let's just focus on this movie for now. And as a horror film, it's effective at being disturbing and showcases the possible horrors of war, with the obvious exception of course, the giant fictional monster, with his minimalistic approach creating, in turn, a very serious tone and atmosphere that conveys dread without coming off as forced, which is very refreshing nowadays. Which makes sense because this was originally created as a propaganda film to show people the horrors of atomic warfare that was going on at the time. So while it is a monster movie, it does have a contrast to brutal, realistic horror, which does make it feel more actually scary than most of these giant monster movies, which just come off as goofy and cheesy as hell. And naturally, me being a horror movie fanatic, it definitely had me engaged all throughout, more so than most of these movies. It also helps that the story was legitimately good, the directing was solid, the effects, while dated, are quite good, and honestly, it being dated actually works to its advantage because it helps it feel more gritty and down to earth. The human characters are not crap, which will be a huge problem in later entries. The pacing is good, the runtime, while brief, doesn't overstay its welcome, and it has pretty good rewatchability. However, with all that addressed and said, this isn't quite as good as the other one we're going to talk about next time, for a few reasons. The dialogue is in Japanese, which without subtitles or prior experience with the language is impossible to really understand. Nothing against Japanese people or Japanese actors, I'm just more used to the English language, with me being an uncultured American doofus. The characters, while not crap for once, are sadly not very memorable and kinda cliche. A couple scenes can break immersion at times by testing the suspension of disbelief a bit too much. Again, not T-posing Godzilla sliding on his tail levels, but just a few moments where it does leave you scratching your head a little bit. The beginning is really slow, and in retrospect of the later entries, it feels disconnected, because, the rest of these movies are cheesy, goofy, over-the-top destruction fests, whereas this one's supposed to be a straightforward, serious propaganda horror film, which when you contrast it with what came after, it feels like a red-headed stepchild in a way, because it feels like the odd one out. It's weirdly disconnected from the rest of the series the more you really think about it, and while it had its roots in horror, it goes as far away from that as possible in its later entries. So that's not this movie's fault, because back then they didn't know what they were going to do with that franchise going forward, but it is unfortunately something in retrospect that does hurt this movie overall, because it's like, you like this kind of stuff? Well, too bad. That's not what you get with the rest of the movies. So, I mean, what can I say? It's unfortunate. It's not this movie's fault, but it is sadly a problem. Overall, though, this is still a surprisingly effective film despite its age, and as far as franchise starters go, it is pretty solid. But despite being made over 20 years after that other one, it still feels pretty inferior, which I can understand the argument of it not really being a fair comparison, as this is a horror film and that other one is more of a fantasy adventure film. But since they're both under the same banner of kaiju movies, it's unfortunately a comparison that needs to be made. Godzilla is more effective when it's a straightforward propaganda horror movie, whereas with the other one, it's admirably strong as a whole film. The original Godzilla is still a very good film in its own right, but sadly it's just not on the same level of quality and refinement as the other film was 20 years beforehand. And because of that, it all comes around to a final verdict of a solid, strong 7 out of 10. It's a 7 out of 10 for Godzilla 1954. An entertaining watch and a really solid start to the franchise that succeeded in what it set out to do, but it's just not quite in the top tier of the kaiju movies and sadly feels like a strange disconnect from the rest of what's to come afterwards. Regardless, it is still a film I recommend. I absolutely recommend this film. If you have not seen this movie yet, you need to. It is definitely one of those movies you need to see. Is it a little overrated? Yeah, but it's still really good in its own right, and it is worth a watch. And if you love horror films, this one will definitely be more up your alley than the silly, cheesy, goofy slugfests to come afterwards. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Godzilla 1954 without spoilers. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this almost every single day. Stay tuned because we still have a lot of kaiju madness coming in the next few days. Starting today with a second review. Yeah, I know. I'm pushing out a lot of content today. And the next one we're talking about is arguably one of the greatest movies ever made. Needless to say, I have a lot to say about it, so I'll see you guys next time when we tackle the masterpiece that is 1933's King Kong.
We cannot take it